I try to answer the question very shortly with another question, which is very critical. I was visiting different places of Lafarge in sub-Saharan Africa with a journalist, and at some point he asked me the question, why are you paying all this money for your clinics, for your libraries, and where is the limit? And I say, you know, it is reasonable. It is because we are there today in this situation and because we believe it's good for our company and it's good, you know, for the development of this country. But it is true that the question is who should do what, and that's where governments and companies need to probably precise much better, you know, how to work together, because it's not so easy to fix the limits. Because our shareholders might ask us, you know, why are you doing all this? Narayana said 2% of profits. What is the reason? What is a decent thing? And what is the role of governments and what is the role of companies? So there are many things which have to be discussed about governance, and above all, at the end, it's the level playing field and the overall, you know, peace and wealth of the world. So that's what I answer. So, yes, and then.
On the day of the human rights, I would like to say that I'm glad about, of course, the agenda of the human rights, and I think a great job had been done on this area. But the facts are very sad. Since so many years of promoting human rights, still half of the world are living in a very deep poverty. A lot of people in the world, billions, doesn't have access until today to clean water. Millions of children are dying in Africa from lack of immunity and food, and starving to death. So speaking about human rights, we're far away from the place where we should be. That no one will starve to death. No one will die from disease which had been totally deleted in the West developed country, like malaria, different other malaria, which kills every year in Africa 1 million people, 900,000 of them are children. And it could be solved very easily by immunization, by medicine which exists all over the world. So when we're speaking about corporate social responsibilities, we're still far away from really how much corporates in the world can do for the starving part of the world. There is a big space to act. Somebody find out that the money which goes every year in America just to buy toy beers towards the Christmas, now it's very popular, is 10 times greater than the aid of the United States to Africa. It could cover 10 years of aid to Africa, just the money which expended for beer. And lastly, on the Council of the Human Rights, it is very sad to see that many times in this council, sitting people of countries which have no human rights at all, like Iran, Syria, Libya. Libya was chairman of this council in Geneva, and I think it's Iran as well, if I'm not mistaken. So it's quite weird. I think we should, I said to me, Mrs. Robinson, maybe it's time come that you take some steps in order that the world should take some steps to prevent from people or governments which are not keeping human rights to be excluded from those councils, etc., because it is quite weird that people who doesn't have no rights in their countries are trying to make the policy of the human rights. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for the questions. I agree with you very much on the harsh reality of our world today, the 21st century, that we have 925 million people who wake up hungry every morning and go to bed hungry, and many of them are children. We have another million who are undernourished, so they don't have rights to food and safe water, health, education, etc. I think that the Millennium Development Goals have helped. We are now coming towards the period where they're supposed to be implemented by 2015. We're coming close to it. And I'm struck by the engagement of both governments and the corporate sector in so many areas on maternal and child health, on education, on right to food security issues. But I still think that as we review up to 2015, we need to go much further and probably engage corporations more centrally into long-term planning, because as has been said, corporations are longer in countries usually than the governments that are providing development aid. There's a need to link both, but certainly I would be the first to say that we are not in a good position. I served on a commission on legal empowerment of the poor, and we concluded that there are about 4 billion people in our world that has just reached 7 billion who don't have access to justice and rule of law, who depend upon neighbours and moneylenders, and they're in the informal sector. But the thing that impresses me very much is that the informal sector is becoming much more organised now with the means of communication, nowhere more than in India. My fellow elder, Ela Bhatt, who founded the Self-Employed Women's Association, what they are doing, very poor women, 1.2 million in Sewa, is extraordinary, in clean cook stoves and all kinds of solar and livelihoods work. So I think we can do much more to tackle the inequalities that are endemic. I've just come, as I mentioned, from the conference on climate. The African continent is absolutely urgently pleading for urgent action on climate because it's undermining poor subsistence farmers. It's not the only thing, but it's definitely now there. I was in Somalia in July with Irish aid agencies. I had been there 19 years before as President of Ireland. This time we spoke about the fact that the Horn of Africa is having the 8 hottest years in succession. And that greenhouse gas warming is our fossil fuel-based growth undermining the livelihoods of the poorest. So there is a justice element that I hope will be taken into account and make it more urgent. On the second point, you're right that countries that don't have good human rights reputations have served initially on the Human Rights Commission, which was there in my time, and now on the smaller Human Rights Council that has been established. And there are 2 ways to look at that. I actually believe the Human Rights Council has a certain standard to be elected to it, which the Human Rights Commission didn't really have. So you're supposed to commit to a human rights course. It doesn't work perfectly. Nothing works perfectly in the United Nations. It's that kind of body. But what the Human Rights Council has instituted, which is, I think, beginning to show some interesting results, is a rather weak, universal periodic review of countries. And that means that all countries come up for review on a regular basis. Last year, the United States came up for review, and countries with poor human rights records were accusing the United States, which has excellent human rights defenders, friends of mine, Mike Posner and Harold Coe. And what they did, in their very clever way, is they took note. Iran is complaining about the United... Well, when Iran's turn comes, we'll put that back to them. And Ireland was done in the same way in the last year, and exactly the same thing. So countries are learning to watch the questions asked by countries with poor records in order, when their turn comes, say, you accused us, now let us get real on this. You have a terrible record in that area. And I think this is probably a better way to deal with human rights, because there was a resentment in poorer countries that international human rights was always about only addressing the human rights standards of poor countries, whereas the Universal Periodic Review is a review of all countries. And I firmly believe that all countries have human rights problems. No country is perfect, and therefore that's a fairer way of going about it.
Thank you. There is a question there. Sorry, one question there, and then...